One, two, three, four. I declare a trade war. You're toast. All right, how about scissors, paper, rock? Ready? Hang on. Dude, we're rolling. Oh, sorry. Hello, I'm Don Frazier.
And I'm David Vogt.
And this is Historical Trends. In this episode, we will discuss the trade war between the United States and the People's Republic of China. We will explain the history of U.S.-China relations to show how we've gotten to this point and how the trade war may affect economic and political relations between these two powerful nations and how it could alter global trade as a whole. But first, let's describe what a trade war is and how it is fought.
Of course. A trade war is generally fought not with guns, but with tariffs and other trade restrictions. A tariff is a tax imposed on imported goods and services. A trade war occurs when one country imposes a tariff on another, and the other country retaliates with their own, raising tensions, and it begins a competition to see which country can damage the economy of the other one more.
Hold on. You said that trade wars aren't generally fought with guns. Does that mean that some might be?
There have actually been some notable instances that escalated into warfare, like the Opium Wars between Britain and China, but economics and trade have figured into many, if not most, of all human conflicts.
The Opium Wars?
Yes, actually fought so Great Britain could import opium into China, even though the Chinese did not like the effects it had on
So they're dumping drugs on China back in the 1840s and 50s. That's awesome. Interesting. Well, this current posturing between the U.S. and China isn't over opium, but there are several collateral issues. Is there any likelihood that the current trade war will escalate into an armed conflict?
It's possible, but not likely, especially in the short term. As far as economics, the U.S.-China trade war may be the biggest in world history, especially considering that the two nations involved have the biggest economies in the world. After the break, we will discuss the history behind U.S.-China relations, and then whether the trade war will be difficult on the U.S. or a piece of cake.
I think you mean a slice of pie.
Laugh track.
Skip! Don't skip! Don't skip!
Hello, my name is Christopher Bartlett. I'm the studio manager with the McWhinney History Education Group, and you may be used to seeing my name in the end credits, or sometimes you'll see me sitting here as a special guest host. But right now, I'm here to talk to you about an amazing new opportunity. We have created a Patreon. To put it simply, if you enjoy the content on this YouTube channel, then you can head on over to Patreon, donate money to us, and become a patron. And through your donations, more content will be made. Basically, it breaks down like this. With $10, you will receive a short thank you video from Dr. Frazier and Dr. Fabrizio. With $25, you will be able to take part in a patron-only poll. With $50, you will get swag. These items include a choice between 2 prints of paintings and signed copies of Dr. Frazier's books, Blood on the Bayou and Thunder Across the Swamp. With $75, you will receive exclusive videos that will not be available anywhere else, not on YouTube and not on SoundCloud. These videos will be just for you, the patrons. With $100, your name will appear in the credits. See that right there? That's where your name can be. Finally, for $500, we will send you a signed collector's edition of Phil Collins' book, The Alamo and Beyond. Yes, it is signed by Phil Collins himself. And remember, for all the higher donations you do, you also get the stuff from the lower ones as well. So it's pretty cool. And when we reach our goal of $5,000, Dr. Frazier and Dr. Fabrizio will give you their own personal ranking of the presidents from worst to best. Coming from the perspective of a historian like Dr. Frazier and a political science expert like Dr. Fabrizio, you really don't want to miss their ranking and why they put them in that order. If you enjoy this content and want to see more, If you believe in our mission of making history accessible to everyone, then head on over to our Patreon and donate as much money as you're willing to give. You'll help us continue what we're doing, and you'll get amazing gifts as our way of saying thank you. Now we return to your regularly scheduled programming.
Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to talk about the history of U.S.-China relations so we can see how we've gotten to this tense point.
The United States and the People's Republic of China, or PRC for short, have been at odds ever since the Maoist communists took control of the mainland China. In fact, the U.S. considered the Republic of China, which is located in Taiwan, to be the legitimate government of China until 1979.
Wow.
30 years after the PRC seized control. Relations were icy because of the U.S. stance against communism, as well as the PRC's support of communist efforts in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. In 1969, the Soviet Union and China had a border conflict that scared the PRC and shattered the already splitting alliance between the large communist nations.
I hate it when the communists fight. Oh well. Even in an episode about China, Russia has somehow figured out how to put its nose under the tent, so to speak. They're everywhere.
Yeah, and China was not happy about that. The PRC's newfound fear of the Soviet Union warmed their relationship with the U.S., leading to President Nixon's famous visit in 1972. As the relationship grew, the nations established embassies in each other's capitals, and the U.S. declared the PRC to be the true China in 1979.
That was a major shift.
Indeed, some considered it a misstep by the U.S., actually. After nearly 20 years of increasing trade and greater cultural exchange, the Tiananmen Square massacre and similar suppressions of freedom took place in China, so the U.S. and other Western nations imposed sanctions in an effort to pressure political change, souring relations. Further conflict occurred in the Third Taiwan Strait crisis, in which the PRC performed military exercises off the coast of Taiwan. The United States sent 2 aircraft carrier groups to defend Taiwan. The U.S. also accidentally bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 1999
Accidentally.
during the Balkans crises, but also uncovered evidence that the Chinese were hacking into U.S. fighter computers and sabotaging their weapons. An American recon plane collided with a Chinese jet in 2001, killing the pilot. The Chinese then detained the crew of the American aircraft for 11 days.
Yeah, I remember that.
Both of those events further harmed relations.
That sounds like a lot of bad blood between the two countries.
It definitely was, but that changed after 9/11. China lost 2 citizens in the bombing of the Twin Towers, and they had problems with Muslim separatists, so they supported the U.S. war on terror. Since terrorism was viewed as a bigger national security threat than China, the United States warmed up to them. Trade relations normalized throughout the 2000s, although Taiwan and North Korea have always been touchy subjects.
Remains so. So, where is this trade war coming from if trade became normalized?
Well, as the U.S. traded more with China, it became abundantly clear that the Chinese government had no respect for U.S. intellectual property laws, and they stole corporate secrets.
That's
In
sneaky.
fact, China steals an estimated $225 to $600 billion worth of intellectual property each year.
That's with a B, billion. Wow.
China also imposed tariffs on foreign goods and purposefully manipulates the value of their currency
The yuan.
in an effort to make themselves into an export-based economy. These actions broke rules established by the World Trade Organization, or WTO, which is an international body designed to regulate trade between nations. Throughout President Trump's campaign, he promised to impose tariffs on countries that were taking, in his words, unfair advantage of the United States through currency manipulation, intellectual property theft, and flooding the steel market.
You kind of look like a miniature
devour-
Trump when you do that. That's kind of weird. All right. Anyhow, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
Which devalues American steel and hurts steel businesses. all of which China does.
Okay, so that explains all the steel tariffs. All right, and also explains kind of the general anger at China. I am sure that Chinese expansion into the South China Sea and into South Asia via Pakistan doesn't help. Let's go over the trade war itself.
Well, in the first year of his presidency, President Trump remained mostly silent on tariffs, despite aggressively campaigning for good deals.
There he is again. That silence didn't last, though.
Nope. He immediately broke it the following year. In January of 2018, the president announced washing machine and solar panel tariffs, prompting angry responses from South Korea, Mexico, his fellow Republicans in Congress, and, topically, China.
That makes sense.
In March, Trump imposed a 25% steel tariff
There it is.
and a 10% aluminum tariff, and then specifically targeted China by applying a tariff of $50 billion worth of goods. These actions prompted retaliatory tariffs from China and, ironically, an issuance of a complaint to the World Trade Organization. State-run media in
You
China.
mean what? You mean all the media in China?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, they accused Trump of starting a trade war, and news companies ran with the term.
Even here.
Yeah, especially here.
Ah, nice.
Since then, Beijing has matched U.S. tariffs, but President Trump issued 2 additional lists of tariffs and then placed a 10% tariff on about $200 billion worth of consumer goods. This latest tariff will increase to 25% at the beginning of 2019.
Wow.
And here we are.
How has the economy responded to this trade war?
The fastest element of the economy to respond to events like a trade war is the stock market.
Makes sense.
For example, on the week President Trump announced the aluminum and steel tariffs in March, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is used to benchmark how well stocks are doing overall, fell by 1.8%. That was the largest drop in over 2 years.
But the market remains at historic highs, so it didn't really leave too big of a mark. Stocks are great and all, but how will all of this affect just normal citizens?
Well, some good, more bad. Products that Trump hit with tariffs increased in price.
Okay.
Steel prices rose 36% between January and July and continue to rise. This actually does help the steel industry in America
As intended.
by creating a projected 30,000 jobs. However, many industries were hurt by the hike in prices, and an estimated 400,000 jobs are at stake. Consumer goods have also been hit by tariffs, which will likely raise prices of everyday products for the average citizen. Economist and political scientist Robert Mundell stated, "Tariffs worsen employment and output because they raise the value of the dollar. This decreased value causes people to spend less and hold on to money, which decreases the overall demand for goods and services. The decreased demand causes suppliers to produce less because they have surplus goods, slowing down the economy as a whole."
Also, China responded with tariffs of their own, which then puts the crimp on us.
Right. And that's where most of the harm from the trade war comes from. China hit agricultural goods with a 25% tariff, severely impacting soybean farmers, who export $14 billion worth of food and happen to be a large Trump vote base. Trump responded with $12 billion worth of aid to cover the damages. Overall, the United States is expected to lose $110 billion from the trade war. Wages are expected to fall by 0.3%, and employment is expected to fall by 0.2%, according to taxfoundation.org. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross stated that consumers will feel a 1% price increase, while distinguished economist Ian Shepherdson predicts consumer goods prices to increase by 0.5%. The Netherlands Bureau for Economic Policy Analysis predicts a GDP loss of 0.3% in the U.S. and a GDP loss of 1.2% in China.
Oh, wow. 0.3%? The news makes it sound like fire and brimstone, like there's some sort of volcano arising out of the Pacific that's consuming all trade.
That shouldn't surprise you.
No. So this trade war will hurt China more than the U.S. Is this trade war meant to punish China for its unfair trade practices, or is there something else afoot?
Well, while I can't read the president's mind, his rhetoric certainly suggests that.
Okay.
In a March speech announcing the tariffs on China, President Trump said, "We have a tremendous intellectual property theft situation going on, which, likewise, is hundreds of billions of dollars, and that's on a yearly basis."
Against China. Okay, good.
But there could be more than that.
Okay.
China is working on the Made in China 2025 project, which is a series of WTO-defying trade practices meant to propel China forward to a state that threatens U.S. supremacy in both economics and military.
A trade war could certainly upset that plan. Earlier you mentioned that the trade war could possibly turn hot. Tell me about that.
Well, the trade war probably won't break out into full warfare anytime soon, but our trade ties to China have been keeping the peace even through our hardest patches on relationship.
Okay, because nobody wants to upset their consumers. I mean, war is bad for trade.
That's right. War would jack up prices for consumer goods in both economies,
Okay.
and citizens would get angry. But if the U.S. is less dependent on China for cheap consumer goods, then it raises the possibility of war without too much backlash. Based on the growth of China's influence, as well as their claims on Taiwan and the South China Sea, it's possible that Trump is opening up the possibility for a proper military response should China overstep their bounds.
Sounds like a second Cold War. Well, we're going to return and explore this topic a little in a little greater depth right after this break.
And good day, everybody. Welcome to The Professors from McMurray University in Abilene, Texas. I'm Paul Fabrizio.
I'm Don Frazier, and our special guest is my colleague and longtime friend, Gary Shanafelt.
And
I'm Scott, the engineer.
My older brother, Tim Frazier. John Samudio to my left, and we're joined in the studio today by Rob Frazier, an expert on cybersecurity. My mom was pregnant a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Dad was a checker player. She moved, he'd jump her. Anyway.
Yeah, the University of California, Berkeley, which, as we all know, has a much better graduate program in history than they do a football team.
you're still smarting over that, aren't you?
Well, I wear my Cal Berkeley sweatshirt here, and the students all kind of think, why are you doing that? I said, well, because they've got a great graduate program. And
Yes.
they don't realize that.
And welcome back. Now we're at the point in the show where I ask you some questions, you ask me some questions, and we have a conversation about the topic at hand, and that's the trade war with China. I am curious about the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK, and China's relationship with them, their relationship with China, and how that might fit in to this whole trade war issue.
Well, before I answer that, I'd like to explain to our audience the situation with North Korea.
All right?
President Trump has been working with China to pressure the DPRK to stop building nuclear weapons as well as ballistic missiles. The U.S. can use the trade war as leverage against China in the North Korea situation, but President Trump has been focusing on trade alone and has expressed that he wants a friendly relationship to China outside of trade. So to answer your question in short, Trump is walking on eggshells trying not to bring the North Korea issue into the trade war.
Well, and for good reason, because if you recall from, second half of U.S. history survey, there was a little thing called the Korean War. And the Korean War was an outing by the United Nations forces to try to turn back an invasion from North Korea into South Korea.
That's right.
And in fact, this American-led coalition rolled the North Korean forces all the way back to the Yalu River. Looked like the good guys had won. But do you remember what the turning point was?
The Red Horde of China.
Yeah, millions of Chinese troops jumping across the Yalu and then pushing everybody back. And without that incident, we would have not had the miniseries or the television show MASH. So thank you for that. But what that means is China is, well, there's just a lot of them. And if they want to put their muscle behind a particular action, you've got serious, serious problems. So you have to walk on eggshells around China because they're significant. 1 out of 4 people on this planet is Chinese. That's a lot of folks.
Yeah.
And so clearly they have something to say and they have national interest as well. And so that would make perfect sense on why China and Korea is a sensitive area of concern. But do you think, are you worried about North Korea being able to nuke the United States?
No, not really.
Don't think that's an issue.
That's probably not an issue.
Well, it would probably be bad, but would the United States, it would probably be bad. People cooking, that's bad. But how would the United States retaliate if the Chinese are guaranteeing North Korean sovereignty? That's a spooky proposition.
Well, the problem is that North Korea has sort of been a thorn in China's side lately.
Ah, okay.
And
So tell me about that.
They're not necessarily being guaranteed by China right now because Kim Jong-un keeps ignoring Chinese advice. They actually would have preferred his uncle to be on the throne right now, but then he assassinated him.
Well, that makes it a little tough, unless you
Yeah.
have a Wayback Machine or something like that.
Right.
You can go back in
So
time.
China's not very fond of the Kim Jong-un regime.
But how do they turn their back on it without turning their back on it is the issue, because saving face is a big issue
Right.
in Asian culture. Okay. So perhaps this trade war is a way of giving China a way out as they're dealing with their nettlesome ally, North Korea. Is this all for show?
On the Chinese side,
Yeah.
it's definitely all for show.
Okay, so they're just making a whole lot of noise because it looks like, I'm going back to your numbers, 1.2% influence on the Chinese
Right.
economy and 0.3% on ours. So, in the grand scheme of things, this is really a lot more smoke than fire.
Right. Well, Xi Jinping has always been portrayed as a strong man in Chinese media. That's sort of his shtick.
Okay.
But so if he backs down on a trade war with Trump, that would ruin his entire reputation.
So he's got to continue to be sticking his finger in the eye of the
Right.
Western devil.
The Chinese citizens don't actually know that China has been defying the WTO for many years.
Well, of course not. It's not like Chinese media is going to say, hey, guess what? We've been cheating in international economics, so we're really bad guys. No, it's the great empire. China's awesome,
Mhm.
and they're not going to say anything to the contrary, certainly in their media.
Yeah, so this looks like a completely unprovoked attack by the U.S.
Which
onto
will
China.
rally the people
Right.
towards their government. So
So-
all right, go ahead.
So if Xi Jinping backs down,
Who is this guy?
he's the president of China,
Oh.
and he recently voted himself to have an unlimited term. So basically, he's dictator for life now,
He's the emperor. Huh.
essentially.
So we now have a new Chinese emperor. Man, it's like the 19th century all over again. What about the South China Sea and the islands out of nowhere and all that? Do you know anything about that?
Well, China has what they call the 9-dash line, which is their historic claim on all of the South China
You
Sea,
just did air quotes. That's funny. Go ahead.
which is their historic. Where was I?
No, you're talking about the 9-dash line.
Okay.
Historic claims.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So China has what they call the 9-dash line, which is their historic claim on the entire South China Sea.
Hmm.
Even though, according to U.S. Maritime
Really, it's international.
UN,
Yeah, UN,
UN
international.
Maritime Law.
Yeah.
According to UN Maritime Law, there's territory in the South China Sea controlled by like 5 different countries.
Yeah, Philippines,
Right.
Vietnam, places like that.
Yep. So China's claim basically treads on all these other claims from foreign nations who have actual reason to claim the area.
And it actually is in contravention of international law
Right.
or convention anyway.
So China has actually been building their own islands in the South China Sea in order to expand their coastline.
Wow.
Yeah, so they can have a legal basis for claiming the entire South China Sea.
And I imagine this probably is driving us a little backwards,
Yes.
as well as our allies in the Philippines, and
Right.
Vietnam, and elsewhere, Indonesia.
That's one of the reasons Vietnam has been distancing themselves from China.
Well, they've never been terribly close. I mean, the Chinese and the Vietnamese have been pals when it suited them, but by and large, they're usually at daggers drawn
Right.
historically. All right, so what about this string of pearls move? Do you know anything about that?
The String of Pearls is a Chinese effort to build military bases in foreign countries, presumably to match the influence of the U.S. militarily.
Okay, and they've already got bases in Djibouti.
Djibouti,
Yeah, on the Horn of Africa.
Right.
But they're also talking about putting a major thoroughfare through Pakistan.
That's right.
And the gateway from Pakistan into China is Kashmir. And Kashmir is a major flashpoint between India and Pakistan.
That's right. India is not happy about that situation.
Because the Indians and the Chinese from time to time square off against each other.
Right. The Indians actually have a very close alliance with Russia, and they're trying to influence Russia to work with them against China.
Wow. There's so much of this stuff that the average American knows nothing about. Wow.
And China also wants to build a naval base in Pakistan, which would surround India.
Yikes. So what, like around Karachi or someplace like that? Dang, a Chinese naval base in the Indian Ocean, that would certainly complicate things.
Right. And
Okay.
China and India have had a lot of border conflicts.
They have swapped shots up in the mountains a lot of times. So really this trade war then may have to do with something much larger
Right.
than just steel prices. This is actually a longer view issue, a 10-year view, a 20-year view.
Yeah, that's why it won't escalate into war in the short term, probably, but it's entirely possible that we could cut our relations off and then work with all of the countries that hate China to pressure them to stop doing these malicious plans.
Well, and China's probably just trying to get a little elbow room in Asia because they've got a lot of people that need to go someplace. I mean, it was interesting when I was in Guadalcanal this summer. The thing that was remarkable to me about this remote South Pacific island was that all the small businesses were owned by Chinese.
That's right.
And so the labor was all Melanesian, Solomon Islanders, but the guys that were actually counting the money behind the counter, they were every last one Chinese. Any infrastructure going in down there was Chinese. And so the Wall Street Journal article right after I came back said that the next battle for Guadalcanal will actually be between the U.S. and China, but that has all of a sudden become a new theater of competition down there in the South Pacific. So much so that Australia and New Zealand, maybe 2 weeks after I came back, announced that they're dragging an internet cable over to the Solomon Islands so that the Solomon Islands can be developed. I mean, it's very, very backwards now. As one buddy that went with me on this trip said, it's not Haiti, but it's a couple of notches up only. And so, even Australia and New Zealand figured out that, we'd better develop these islands, and not because we want these islands to flourish and be nice resorts. It's so that the Chinese don't develop them.
That's right.
And then the next thing you know, you've got a Chinese base between the United States and Australia and New Zealand. So everything old is new again. Anyhow. All right, so let's take a break. And you've got some questions from viewers and other people that have phoned in or texted in or sent in emails. All right, we'll be right back.
Bear Leader Tours. Where will Bear Leader Tours take you? Everywhere. Paris, Bruges, Trieste, battlefields, Pearl Harbor, Pacific beaches, New Orleans. Join the adventure.
www.mcwhinney.org.
And we're back, and now we have viewer questions. Why don't you hit it?
All right. Viewer Comrade Ranch asks.
This is really his name, Comrade Ranch?
It's a long story.
Okay. Please.
Comrade Ranch asks, how will the outcome of the trade war affect the standings of U.S. and China in the view of other regional and global powers?
What do you think?
Well, it's definitely bringing us closer to some and distancing us from others. Pakistan, for example, is growing much closer to China since the trade war because of the US.
That doesn't break my heart. I mean,
Right.
Pakistan did, after all, shelter Osama bin Laden, etc. But please go on.
Yeah, because they're increasing their oil trade with China
Well, that makes
because
sense.
of the U.S. breaking the Iran deal and all that.
Sure.
It's also I'm not 100% sure on how this will end up, but I'm pretty sure it's bringing us closer to Europe because Europe doesn't really like China's trade practices either,
Yeah.
and I don't think they're huge fans of their power grabs. So sometimes Europe is on the line, but they tend to teeter towards the U.S. when it comes to trade war.
They lean towards the U.S.
Right.
I'll tell you, when I was traveling in Australia and also traveling with some people from New Zealand, they are wringing their hands about this trade war. Says, man, President Trump is going to start a real life shooting war with China. And I'm looking at them going, I don't know, man. I don't see it.
Well, Australia and New Zealand specifically have had Chinese infiltration into their governments. So,
and that's provable.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's I'm not really sure how Australia and New Zealand are gonna like it. Assuming they purge the Chinese influence, they'll probably be huge fans.
Yeah, that would make sense. But
Over
boy,
time.
people were certainly wringing their hands.
Right. Right now, Australia and New Zealand probably not huge fans.
Okay. Well, it is on their doorstep, so to speak.
That's right.
All right. Next question.
All right. Future Space Force Officer 123 asks how the trade war has affected Trump's approval ratings. Overall, there hasn't really been any spikes in the approval ratings whenever Trump has made a trade war announcement. I don't think U.S. citizens are very concerned about economic policy.
Well, 1%,
Right.
1% is not that big a blip one way or the other.
That's right.
And so this trade war exists more as talking points amongst pundits than it seems to affect people going to Walmart
That's right.
at this point.
Although there are actually consumer good tariffs now, and that's going to start raising some of the prices.
Okay. Well, so it remains to be seen.
Right.
Perfect. You got another one?
Yep.
All right.
At Rachel D.B. Hopper asks how we would define the political bias shaping public opinion around the trade war.
That kind of speaks to it.
Yeah.
All right. Drive on.
Believe it or not, a lot of Democrats are actually bigger fans of the trade war than most fiscal conservatives.
Really?
Yeah, because historically the Democratic Party has been more for tariffs and all that. And
why?
they like more government control.
And it also helps
Over the
trade unions
economy.
and things
That's
like
right.
that. Okay.
So I believe it was Chuck Schumer who actually praised Trump when he announced his tariffs against China.
Man, that would cause a Facebook storm if you
Mhm.
posted that. My goodness.
So a lot of top dog Democrats are agreeing with Trump, and
But
many
they
of
can't admit it.
right.
Hashtag resistance. Yes. Okay.
But a lot of fiscal conservatives who like free trade and open markets and all that, they're not huge fans. And Wall Street right now,
Which would really be more Republican.
right?
Yeah, Republicans have always been about free trade.
That's right.
Wow.
Wall Street right now is fuming. They're saying that this trade war is going to cause an economic collapse, even though that has yet to be seen.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, man. I just see the indicators going, up.
Right.
They're heading north, not south.
So a lot of Wall Street investors are not happy about this.
they're
and
not
they
happy
tend
about
to
it, but
lean-
they're
Right.
they're crying all the way to the bank. Looks like to me. Interesting. Well, maybe it's too early to know at this point, but gosh, I was expecting to hear a lot more dire news. But in your opinion, the news is not dire yet.
Nope, not as dire as all the media outlets claim it is.
Huh, okay. Well, I appreciate the conversation, David. And I think we've run out of time for this particular episode. For Historical Trends, I'm Don Frazier,
I'm David Vogt.
and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
China! China, 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 China. I love China. China all the time. China! China, 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 China. I love China. China all the time. China! China, 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 China. I love China. China all the time.